not sponsored. I want to be really clear from the start of this video. If you're looking for a dedicated video camera, you're going to have a really hard time finding a camera that offers more than the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro. Hello my precious little eggies, you guessed it, today we're talking about the BMP-CC 6K-P, but where this camera lacks a good name, it surely makes up for it in awesome features. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro, which for the rest of this video I'm just going to be calling it the 6K because I'm gonna die if I have to keep saying that over and over again, is a fantastic quote-unquote budget option for my video people out there who are looking for a cinema camera. The word budget gets thrown around a lot on YouTube, and I know $2,500 is a lot of money. But when you look at other cinema cameras, like Reds or the Canon C300 Mark III, the Canon C70, even the Sony a7S Mark III, the 6K Pro can hang with those cameras and it's a fraction of the cost. It takes the super high quality, good codec, high dynamic range footage that you love out of those big cinema cameras and squeezes it down into a pretty small package. I'm going to talk about what it's like using this camera, who I think it's for, and the specs, but first let's take a look at what this camera can do. Those of you who have been following my channel for a long time know that I take my time with reviews. Please don't ask me about the Polaroid Go review. And that's because I really like to get to know the camera that I'm using. Those YouTube reviews where they've had the camera for 2 hours and just have a stupid photo or video of their coffee and don't have any experience with the camera and pretend to know it, those make me want to vom. That said, with the 6K, I actually don't own this camera. I've used it on a ton of different projects over the last couple of months, but there are two in particular that I want to talk to you about. I shot a music video over the summer for my friend's band Lords of the Sun, and that music video came out today, so make sure you go check that out after you watch this video. And I shot the short film Things That Blank My Blank, which is over on Nailed It Network. You can watch that after you watch the music video. So what's it like filming on the 6K Pro? Honestly, I don't have a better way of saying this, it's pretty fucking cool. The ease of use is straight up 10 out of 10. The menu systems are fantastic, it's all touchscreen, it's all very intuitive, it's all extremely user-friendly. If you've used a video camera before, you can pick this up and in an hour know everything about it. I think this camera is so fascinating to me because I have a lot of experience shooting on a lot of different video cameras. Over the years I've been on Canon, I've been on Sony, nowadays I'm on Fuji, and I think the 6K just takes a lot of the things that the other camera manufacturers get wrong and does them right. This is one of those cameras that really knows how to get out of the way of itself. Everything is so simple.
All of this just works. It's not, I'm not kidding. Everything
about it just puts you in the zone for creating. It is the antithesis of my Sony cameras, where the menus are just so cluttered and such a clusterfuck. This camera is just straightforward, and it just lets me create, and I love that. Of course, the camera is not perfect, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few. For me, I think the 6K is an intersection between digital and analog. The camera doesn't have any sort of continuous autofocus like the Canons, the Sonys, the Fujis, the Nikon. Sorry, I don't mean to forget you Nikon, I just don't really use Nikon. It does have a one-shot autofocus thing, but once you start recording, it's not going to follow you. And I gotta tell you, I never used that feature. I was all manual all the time on this camera. And if you're shooting on a flat profile or using the Blackmagic RAW, the amount of options you have for color grading is unbelievable. There's so much flexibility. That partnered with the dynamic range of this camera, the colors that I can get out of it are absolutely astounding. It really does feel like an intersection between my film photography and my digital video work. Who is this camera for? That's a tricky question. In my opinion, there's a very niche group of people who this camera appeals to, and I think if you're watching this video, you might already know that. In my opinion, it's definitely not for like a YouTube vlogger. This camera doesn't have a flip out screen, it doesn't have continuous autofocus. This is definitely not a camera where if you're like me and you're on your own most of the time, you can just set it and forget it. This is definitely one where you need to be behind the camera. Granted, you can set up a monitor, you can manual focus on yourself, but it just doesn't seem super vlogger vlogger friendly in my opinion. I should note here though, the screen does articulate, it just doesn't flip out, it goes up and down. It also isn't for people who care about taking photos. Now I know the name of this channel, so stay with me for a second here. If you care about shooting photos and videos in a single package, this is definitely not it. This is very much a video camera. The thing doesn't even come with a viewfinder, so you know, it's not necessarily a photographer's dream. This is for people who want a dedicated video camera. This is for people who want to be behind the camera and who want to shoot some really high quality stuff. Let's talk specs on this camera. Let's talk about the good and the bad, the pros and the cons, the eggs and the not eggs. First off on the pros, and this is kind of specific to me and this isn't going to apply to everyone, but the camera has an EF mount. Coming from someone who's been in the Canon ecosystem for such a long time, I have a bunch of EF lenses, so it was really easy to pick up this camera and start using it. I didn't have to buy a bunch of new lenses. The EF mount also has tons of adapters so you can put different lenses on it. For the Lords of the Sun music video, I actually spent a ton of time using an M42 Takumar 50mm f1.4 lens. I'm not gonna lie, the lens looks really stupid on this camera, but man does that footage look cool. With the massive LCD screen that performs really well in bright sunlight and the focus peaking, it is a dream to use those manual focus vintage lenses, or just manual focus in general. The low light is definitely improved from the older versions of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinemas, and to me it's even better than the Ursa Mini, which is kind of impressive again for the price point. It has a built-in ND filter, which is so cool. It's 6-stop, so if it's a really bright sunny day, you might need a little bit more ND to shoot wide open like at f1.8 or 1.4, but having that built in is so convenient. There's a USB-C port on the side of the camera, and though I haven't tried this myself, I actually read online that you can use a Samsung SSD and record straight to that, which is wild. That's super cool. Ooh, excuse me, especially because the file sizes are so massive on this camera when you're using the 4K or above. If you're using the 6K, forget it. It's crazy how fast you'll go through cards. And speaking of, there's a plethora of options for your frame size, for your aspect ratio. You can do DCI, you can do 4K, you can do 6K, you can do ProRes, you can do Blackmagic RAW. There's so many options. It's so friendly for video people because it's a video camera, wow. I mean, here's the biggest one if you're into color correction. This camera has internal 12-bit RAW. There you go, sold. If you're using the raw footage or just a flat profile, you have the ability to turn on a LUT in the camera to see what it's going to look like when you're editing it. It's super helpful. This video has been a love fest so far. It's time to talk a little bit about some of the things I don't quite love about this camera. The battery life is complete poo-poo without some sort of extender. It's better than the older models which use the Canon LPE6 batteries. Now these are using the Sony MPF batteries, which do have a better battery life, but they still die pretty quickly. And you know, that has to do with the massive screen on the back of the camera, that has to do with the big file sizes, I get it. But if you don't have a battery extender, this thing will croak pretty quickly on you. Or I guess you can bring 47 batteries with you for a shoot. Calling this the Pocket Cinema is a meme. I mean, this camera, listen, it's way smaller than like a C300 or an Ursa, but this is still a pretty big camera. I mean, you're gonna need the world's largest cargo shorts to put this in a pocket. Is that a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? And I know I'm making a lot of jokes about the pocket thing, but going back to the batteries, if you're throwing an extender on this, the camera gets even bigger. If you use the official extender from Blackmagic, it's massive, it's huge. I actually use the V-mount core battery extender, which is a little bit lower profile from that, but again, it still does make the camera's footprint much bigger. The camera has no in-body image stabilization, so you might want to grab a lens that has some, or stick to the tripod. The rolling shutter is definitely noticeable if you're whipping the camera around. In my opinion, it's not as egregious as some of the Sony cameras. You can check out my A6400 review to get a look at what that looks like. The viewfinder for the camera, which, keep in mind, I haven't tested this myself, so I can't vouch for if this price is worth it or not, is $419. So if you're interested in that, that's pushing the price up to $3,000 now. I really don't love how Blackmagic tries to piecemeal every camera they sell. There isn't a shoe on the camera, not even a cold shoe, so you're gonna have to adapt something or get a cage because you can't throw a Rode mic on this thing, which is annoying. While I've heard people complain about the ergonomics of this camera, I don't really mind how it feels in the hand. I think it fits nicely and the grip is good, but then again, maybe that's because I have
big meaty claws.
but the camera itself feels very plasticky. It feels very cheap, and I think for this price point, they just had to cut some corners, and the build is where those corners were cut. Because I gotta tell you, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know I have a track record of dropping cameras. I genuinely think 1 or 2 drops will destroy this camera, especially like on concrete. Yeah, I don't think it would fare so well. And this one is kind of a big deal to me. The battery indicator is somewhat vague. It kind of shows up there. There's no estimate to how long it's gonna last. It just turns red and then dies, and that's it. It's gone. There's no warning. All right, I'm about to head out, and then just disappears. The 6K is like, I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark. One of the other benefits of using the Core V-mount battery extender is that actually has a timer on the side of it, so it kind of fixes that vagueness I'm talking about. You can use SD cards with the 6K Pro, but you're gonna need like Super Saiyan 4 SD cards because the file sizes are so big, you need those crazy write speeds. But honestly, I think this camera is more designed to work with the CFast cards, which, hey, that's fine, but keep in mind those cards are pretty friggin' expensive. I'm used to using the 256 gig CFast cards, which is obviously much bigger than the typical 64 gig SD card that I use, but keep in mind if you're moving into the system, that could be another huge cost for you if you buy a couple CFast cards. That adds up real quick.
0 to 100 real quick.
But listen, none of those flaws are game breaking. Like when Doom Eternal gets an update and something gets fucked up, I don't stop playing Doom Eternal. You know, that's just not in the script for me. Using the 6K Pro is such a positive experience, and frankly, it inspires me. I have such a good time when I film on this camera. And if YouTube wasn't my main thing, I'd probably own one of these. For right now, it makes more sense for me to just borrow it whenever there's a music video shoot or a short film that I'm doing, but who knows, in the future, this might end up in my collection. I really have a ton of love for this camera. I'm giving this camera 9 Owen Wilson wows out of 10.
Wow.
Thanks for watching, guys. Smash subscribe. Let me know if you have this camera. Let me know if you're interested in the camera, and find me on the social medias. This video is now over. Bye.
Like and subscribe. Sweet Loop Photography. Domain.